Welcome to Reality Storyline Decoded podcast. This is episode 12. I'm your host, David Mivshek. Let's code break. So in episode 11, I showed you the code breaking of a fate stack that had the band members for the band Peter, Paul, and Mary use their last names and decoded into partly a phrase that kind of preempted the idea of what the song was generally about, what type of production it was, like in music production, and then gave some abbreviated notation of the lyrics of some parts of the verses. Okay, so that's how a fate stack for band members in a musical band works. It tells about the lyrics to a notable song. In this episode, as I said in episode 11 I was going to do, I'm going to decode the fate stack for the Beatles band members. And these are 4 band members. There was somebody who played, I believe it was drums or something before Ringo Starr, or one of the band members. This does not use his name. This is using the members that are most notably associated with the Beatles, which is the top, John Lennon, and then you have the name Starkey below that, and that's for Ringo Starr because his last name is actually Starkey, not Starr. That was just a stage name. And then Harrison below Starkey, and then McCartney for Paul McCartney on the bottom row. And as all the fate stacks that I've shown you so far, the last name on the top in the first row is the shortest name, where the longest name is on bottom, and then it goes from shortest to longest from top to bottom, as you can see, based on the amount of letters, because there's no spaces. So each point of the matrix here is a letter, so you can measure how long the name is based on how many letters, right? So you can just see shortest name on top to longest name on bottom. Now, in previous episodes, I've shown some other fate stacks that I solved, and I go over, the rules of how to decode a fate stack, and I'm trying to do less of that as time goes on, but I know this is new for many people, so I'm gonna, summarize, the rules as I go along and code break the Beatles. So, again, if you haven't seen Fate Stack or any of these episodes, because this is a study that I've developed, or uncovered, I'd like to say, and I've termed it ordotics. So just real quick, just to get it in your mind, and there's people out there that are really interested in, is reality a simulation? Are we living in a computer program type deal, And they, a lot of the speakers that talk about it just fantasize in general philosophical meanderings in a way. And it's not saying that, I guess their points have some value, and I'm not downing anybody. I don't mean it that way, but it just kind of leaves it open-ended. Is it a simulation, right? And then it's well, I think it is, and then it becomes this belief thing. So before that idea came out, the simulation, back in the early 2000s, for reasons, that I've talked about in episode 10, I started to just decode words, and I started realizing there is a pattern there, right? And then I started from there, instinctually almost, just kind of going down this trail and uncovering the storyline of life, okay? And it shows that there's a code running reality, basically, right? And it's like a computer game or video game runs off of a computer language, and the code developed through that computer language. That's the same thing as reality. And just real quick, it's pretty much a binary system. You have numbers and you have letters, in this code. And the numbers are describing the physical setting of reality. That's why when you use mathematics and mostly numbers, you can derive at solutions that tell you something about the physical universe, In ordotics, which is a study that I've uncovered, I use letters Okay, instead of numbers, I use the letters. The alphabetical system of the English alphabetical system is what I use from A to Z, and I use that in a similar fashion to, let's say, a mathematician would use numbers by, manipulating them, putting them together. They can add, divide, subtract, do equations, complex equations, so forth. That's kind of the same thing with letters, but not so much addition, subtraction. It's its own unique kind of processes, and it unveils a storyline of life. So you have the setting, which is mathematics measuring the universe to tell you about the setting, and then orthotics uses letters to tell you about the storyline that weaves through that setting from past to future. So you can think of it like, let's say, the number system, right, is providing a way to unlock the secrets of the physical universe, where orthotics is using letters to unlock the storyline. Okay? And it's really kind of simple. I think so, maybe because I've done it for so long, but the general concept to grasp, I think, is on the same kind of level as, let's say, if somebody's trying to teach you math or subtraction or multiplication for the first time. You get it pretty quickly. I mean, once, as a very young kid, it still can be difficult, but I'm just saying that when you get older, you're like, okay, if somebody was to tell me how to add two numbers together and I didn't realize you could do that, I guess being a little older and, the logic that your mind kind of absorbs and is able to kind of use against new information, you could add numbers pretty simply. Or if somebody showed you some type of simple math, you'd be like, okay, I get that. Like playing a game of Sudoku or whatever, things like that. You kind of grasp the concept pretty quickly. Doesn't mean you're good at math. It just means you kind of grasp the concept. And that's the same thing with this. It's just kind of on a simpler level. And maybe it's because, it's reading words. As long as, you can read, and, then you should be able to get the concept somewhat quickly. So anyway, all right, so in this episode, like I said, I'm going to decode the last names of the band members for the Beatles. And when band members, you can think of it like a filing cabinet. Let's say you pull open a folder and it says Fate Stacks. That's what this is. It's called a Fate Stack. And the reason is that you stack the last names, right? And then it tells you the fate of the band members. Not necessarily fate as in a passing or a death. It's just the fate, the destiny, what they're going to do, right? What has fallen upon them. All right? And so so you can think you open up a folder, and let's say you open up the folder and it says Fate Stacks on it, and you're like, okay, I know I'm in the realm of Fate Stacks. And then you go into a file within that folder, and it says, band members, of the same band. And you're like, okay, now I know I'm talking about band members of the same band. And then you pull it open, there's another file that says the Beatles, right? A category for the Beatles. And you're like, oh, okay, these are the Beatles band members. Now, within that same folder for band members, or file for band members of the same band, all of those solutions, no matter what the band is, will come out to be about lyrics to a notable song by the band, which would imply that since the band members didn't put that code in their last name because they thought, well, we'll write lyrics based on this code in our last name, right? That if it is a repeatable process for different bands with the band member names, then there may be something programmed into the last names, right? And just quickly, if you're thinking, well, how can that be? I don't understand. Let me show you the Fate Stack, and then I'll kind of briefly go over a little bit more about that, afterward. But I think seeing a Fate Stack, if you haven't, and I've kind of done the same type of spiel for every video because it's like not really sure if people are new or understanding it or whatever. So the first step is just to connect letters of the band members' last names to create new words, because what else are you going to do with all these words, right? You can throw them in the air and see if they just fly away, but that's really not going to do you any good. So if there's an answer, it's going to be by connecting the letters and making new words that will provide a description, okay? And I'll make that make sense, or the lyrics. So you can connect letters horizontally or vertically, but never just diagonally. You can use each letter only once, right? And each letter has to be used, so you cannot have any leftover letters. So that's just the basic rules. And I box them in to connect them so you can clearly see the letters without lines in between them and all that other stuff. So this first word I'm creating is, I take the name Lennon and I add the S to make it like a possessive of the name Lennon, right? So it's Lennon's, like Lennon did something, okay? Or something is owned by Lennon. Now the name Lennon here isn't in the answer is not, it does not have to directly do with John Lennon. It's actually his son Julian, okay? Because the song that is described by the answer is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, okay? And it's a notable song by the band. And a lot of people know it when they hear it, you know. And this is, I'm reading something, that's why I'm looking over here. So I had put because there's no definition for Julian Lennon, I guess, in the dictionary. So this is my little kind of spiel. Julian Lennon is the son of John Lennon, one of the 4 founding members of the Beatles, and main songwriter of the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Now, why would it be describing his son Lennon? Okay, so I am just going to box in the next word and then tell you why. Okay, so once you use the letters, like I said, you can only use them once. You can kind of think of like a video game or something, like poof, these letters are gone. So now you go down to the second row, and I'm going to take these 3 letters and spell the word art with them, A-R-T. So in the answer it says Lennon's art, okay? So what about Lennon's art if we're talking about his son? Now this is from Wikipedia. It's not the first source I like using, but it's not really going to spew out propaganda for political reasons based on this song, so I'm not too worried about it. But it's Lucy. This is from Wikipedia again. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is a song written primarily by John Lennon, but Lennon's son Julian inspired the song with a nursery school drawing he called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So John Lennon's son Julian makes this drawing, right? And then John Lennon, his father, is enamored by it to the point that he writes a song for it. Okay, so something to do with Lennon's art, right? And that's where the song had its origination from, was that drawing. And it was a very important part of the song because that's basically part of the song's origin story. And so the next word after art is key, K-E-Y, right? So it's Lennon's art key. And what that means is not a key that you would, hold and open a door with. In this sense, key is important or fundamental. Like you say, if you're going to play basketball, a basketball hoop is key, right? It's needed, it's fundamental, okay? I should say the word art, Lennon's art, the product of skill and taste applied according to aesthetic principles, works of art, okay? And if you've seen the last episode with the code breaking of Peter, Paul, and Mary, you can see this one started out too, kind of giving a description of the song. We knew it was a story or a tale, and it was a work of art. With the, that's what the word work means in that case. And then it went on to tell about a story, and which has to do with the lyrics. It went on to describe a story in a summarized sense, or very, tight, concise, phrase that had to do with the idea of the lyrics, okay? Because you have to think you're only dealing with so many letters. I think in the Peter, Paul, and Mary case, it's 20 letters, right? So if you were going to make a code out of that and describe lyrics and the song, then it has to hit certain words and parts of that song that it can use a small amount of letters to give enough information to evidence, the lyrics. Okay, so the first phrase for the Beatles is Lennon's art key, and the colon is like is in these answers. Not necessarily in fate stacks all the time. It could be the beginning of a list or whatever it is, but you can think of it as Lennon's art is key. Okay, so like if you had ART apostrophe S, and that art's key would be art is key. Okay, I don't want to get too much into all the nuancy stuff, but that's just basically some of the punctuation. All right, so the next word I'm going to box in is the word march. M-A-R-C-N-H. So it begins the next phrase. So I should say when these fate stack matrices are broken down or decoded, the words are removed from top left to bottom right. So you run your finger across, you used all these letters for Lennon's, it's gone. That word Lennon's is gone. And then you go to the second row and you hit the A or the T, right? And the word art is part of that, so that's gone. Continue to go across, key is gone. Now I went down and I hit, what is this, the letter H of March. And so now I'm using that block of letters. And once you make a block of letters, you take the letters out and you can recombine them or anagrammatize them into the word that fits the solution. Now that sounds very subjective, I understand that. But you can think of algebra with math. If you have a math problem that says 4 plus x equals 8, right? You can't fit in the number 9 there when it makes sense to the solution, right? 4 plus 9 equals 8. You can't put in the number 2 because if x equals 2, it would be 4 plus 2 equals 8, and that's not correct. So you'd have to put in the number 4, right? 4 plus 4, x equals 4, equals 8. And so yes, you have to, and it's like back engineering. Okay, I'm taking a system and trying to figure out how it works, right? And I'm going and basically focusing in to see, is there an answer, and do they all kind of have similar answers for like band members they have to do with lyrics. And then if I see enough that do, then it would only make sense to find the ones to create answers that show lyrics, right? It wouldn't make sense to throw in stuff in words that don't make sense with a sentence. So, or you can't read it, it's just gobbledygook, right? So there's a little bit of subjectiveness that way, but the fact that it's a repetitive process and it works through all these different bands is where the telling tale is, right? So in this case, the word march means a forward movement, a steady advance, or progress. So you're marching through time. That doesn't mean you're like your soldier going marching like that, right? It just means it's a general kind of, you can think of it like a poetic sense of marching, just moving forward, at a steady pace type deal, okay? Now, something's marching. So we already know Lennon's art is key, and it is in this song because Julian Lennon made the picture or the artistic production that his father used, as a basis for the song, right? And that makes that drawing key, okay? Now we know something's marching. And in this song, marching, or the word march, I should say, and because of copyright laws with verses of songs and things like that, I have to make sure that I'm not using a lot of the work, without proper respect, at least for the copyright, because copyright on songs and lyrics is really tight. So this is from the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles, okay? And this is the evidence that the lyrics have to do with something about moving forward, progressing, okay? So in verse 1, line 1 of the song, it's picture yourself in a boat on a river, okay? So you're in a boat and you're on a river. Now, verse 4, okay, then the song goes on to kind of describe the surrounding, Okay? Then in verse 4, line 1, it says, follow her, you're still in your boat. Follow her down to a bridge by a fountain. Okay? So you're in your boat, now you're moving, you're following this girl, because it's a her, down to a bridge by a fountain. Okay? You go, you're moving, you're progressing. And then in line 3 of verse 4, it says, everyone smiles as you drift past the flowers. So now you're still moving, you're drifting past the flowers. So you can think of being on this boat and, just going down the river, following this girl to, down the ways and, drifting past the things that you're drifting past, so forth and so on. And as you read the song's lyrics, you get the sense of this continuous movement of passing settings and different things like that. All right, so that's the keyword march. And most of the times, and I would say probably 99%, when the answer words are given for the fate stack, they follow the order the song is spoken in, like the lyrics, like the story. So if it says march, it's generally going to tell you something about what's going on before the next keyword hits, and then that you'll find that in the lyrics afterward. So it's it's almost like, let's say the song was written, it's almost like it's going back, like summarizing it after the song's written, but instead of being like, oh, I'll be tricky, I'll go from the top verse to the last verse to the middle, so it's harder to find this code. It's like it just says, easy enough, we'll just go then from the first verse down to this verse and the fifth and maybe down the eighth verse, and then tell the story that way, okay, in the answer for the fate stack. So the first word is march, right? The second word that I'm boxing in here, and I'll show you, is the word car. So march is gone, and now we got the word car, C-A-R. Okay, and you can see I put it next in the answer. And a car in this sense is a vehicle moving on wheels, okay? So we're just going to say generally, we're talking about some type of vehicle moving on wheels. Now, when you get to the fifth verse, so you're going down the verses, and there's a chorus that repeats Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I count that as a verse. It could be called a stanza, whatever you want to call it. So when you get down to the fifth verse, in line 1 of the fifth verse, it says, newspaper taxis appear on the shore. Okay? So there's taxis on the shore. So now we're talking about moving vehicles. And this is telling about one of those moving vehicles by saying car. Okay? The second word I'm boxing in, after car is gone, is the word is from the letter I, right? So we got car is. So the car is something, some type of thing the car is doing, right? And the next word after is the word on, O-N, okay? And you can see it there in the phrase. So it's march, car is on. And we're looking at this as kind of like the answer is a progression, okay? So you have the march, comma, and car is on. So now we're following the lyrics down. And it says, after the first line about telling you about the newspaper taxis on the shore, line 2 of that same verse, it says, waiting to take you away. So these newspaper taxis that are on the shore are waiting to take you away, okay? And that lends the idea that there's these taxis ready to go, right? And this next part of the answer says car is on, right? It's not like car is off, it's parked, it's no movement, it's not ready to go, type scenario. It's car is on. And in the answer it says the taxis are waiting to take you away. They're ready to go, right? Car is on. All right. And I should just give you the definition of on in this sense means being in operation, okay? So it's working. It's an operation. The next word I boxed in is the last 5 letters. It's the E, N, T, R, and Y for entry, okay? So the list in the answer is march, car is on, and then entry. In verse 5, line 3. So all of these have been in the same verse. We started with we started with the car is on, meaning the newspaper taxis on the shore are waiting to take you away. And then there's an entry, okay? And that entry goes along with the same verse, verse 5, line 3, okay? It's climb in the back with your head in the clouds. Climb in the back of the newspaper taxi is what it's talking about. And that would be the entry into the car. So, very interesting in how congruent this one is with the Peter, Paul, and Mary for Puff the Magic Dragon, because it's rows and it talks about the person who rows. It's a sailor, okay? And that means, they're roving on the sea. And so that movement, right, on the sea is very congruent with the idea of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. You're on a river on a boat and you're, progressing forward. And in this sense, then it talks about a car for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and getting in the car and then taking you away, basically, is, the idea of the newspaper taxi takes you away. And that's part of the song lyric. So, all right, so that's a fate stack for another band. That's the Beatles. And as I had mentioned, before I did the fate stack, right, these answers that are within the last names that tell about the verses basically forfeit, I would say, kind of the knowledge of reality storyline, okay? It's like, I'm not saying the storyline doesn't want to be found. I don't mean it that way, but you're peeling back the categorical conglomeration of, names, right? And you're peeling back those names and kind of exposing a secret within those names. It's almost like the trapdoor is the people's names and their letters, and then when you pull it open, you start looking in there and you're starting to see that code, being exposed, at like a summarized level, right? So I'm kind of seeing this as you go to this area. It could be a faraway land, another dimension, whatever. And there's all these like trap doors, right? And there's a big like sign, like, posted above where all these trap doors are, and it says, bands that have been, bands that will be, musical bands, right? And it says pull open a trap door to learn more about, that band, right? And as you're pulling back all these trap doors, and you're on the trap door is the band's name, right? And the name of the band, and you open it up and it gives you kind of a summarized biography of who the band members are. And, it's like telling you, like leading you to use the last names, and then you start realizing as you keep opening this trap door farther and farther, the main trap door is open, but you keep going in and there's different doors and different, compartments, and you're going in there and you start realizing, wait, all of these bands have codes within the names of the band members, and it's telling me something about the lyrics, right? Even though it seems like, why would that be? Why would it be there, right? The question isn't why would it be there. The answer is it is there, right? And that would, spark in the mind, and it should spark in the mind, it does my mind, that if it is there, because there's so many that it is there, right? And so many band members' names that this code is in, that one would have to start to think, especially if they're just in this land with all the trapdoors and there's nothing else going on, that that's intentionally put into the last names. And if somebody might think, well, how could that be? How could those words have, build into phrases that tell about lyrics of these these bands that have made those songs, right? How could it be in there? I mean, it seems like, they already have last names, and the last names are spelled from left to right. How would somebody get all these squiggly bent words with with a code that spells out something linearly about the song? How could somebody do that, right? And it's just, that's a thing. That's how we know humans didn't do it. So there's like kind of the first lesson, right? It's like, if all these answers are in these fate stacks the way I say that they are, then you'd have to say no human did that. Well, that just basically leaves an atheist, I guess, to say, well, then it's naturally there. Or they'll just write it off because they don't want to look at it, because they know what it's going to lead them to believe. And it's like, so, well, naturally it's there. Well, then you have to kind of say, if nature put it there just because that's evolution, right? Then you really have to think evolution isn't a process where it's just like big things happen and then animals change, type deal. Or they just fit in with the environment, based on the food sources and, where their enemies are, the prey and the predator type deal. You would have to kind of look at it as evolution as a very focused movement through time to the letter level, right? Where there's codes. And then one would have to think, well, that would mean either it's just haphazardly happening, or there's a conscious focus to do it, right? Because it's not like, just like a hill with sand, that's just getting less and less sand and becoming more round over time, or, humans like, I don't know, starting to develop like an extra bit of lobe on their ear over time, whatever it may be, right? This is like stuff down to last names, letters, phrases in those, names, spelling out things consistently that have to do with similar, constructions of fate stacks, like band members' last names all have lyrics in them type deal. So, because I started this mostly as an atheist, it's like, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, maybe I'm wrong about what reality is. Maybe I need to let reality tell me what it is, right? Because I didn't make myself. I was put into reality. I woke up at 5 or 6 years old and realized I was somewhere, I don't know how I got here. So maybe you need to let reality explain itself, right? And instead of trying to tell reality what it is, or telling what everybody else what you think reality is, when those things don't match up to what reality really is. Okay? So that's when you have to kind of look at all those nuancy things about letters and how they're in names with phrases and things like that. And you have to kind of put your mind in the set that it's more like a video game maker, right, that develops their own code, right, not using somebody else's, develops their own code. And they, like, you can think of it with numbers and letters and symbols, however you want, just like, and they make a video game, but based on their own code they make, right, not using somebody else's that's been, worked on for 50 years since video games have been around, but they develop their own, right? And then they say, okay, it's going to be based on letters, let's say, and then they put that into the computer, which their system allows it to all work with that code that they create, right? And in that code, it defines a setting and it defines a storyline of the game, okay? And then they give that language, right, those letters, not necessarily the computer language, but the letters that it uses, and they give it to the characters in the game that they produce, right? So these characters can talk to one another, right, in this game with the letters, but the characters in the game are using it to talk conversationally, or are not using it to make a game, so they don't put it together the same way that the video game maker gave it, had made it to make the game work, right? So you can think of it like facets of a diamond, or two sides on a triangle, I guess. Here's the computer program working and with those letters, and here's the game characters, communicating with those letters, putting titles on things, labeling things with letters, giving themselves last names with those letters, right? But they don't see how to put it together to see that code. Where the game maker could see the code and what those characters are seeing. And then let's say that game maker says, well, I'm going to give the ability to those game characters to see the code that's running them, that's making them do what they do, right? And slowly takes a character, right, and slowly moves them towards the other side of the triangle, that other side, to see the code, right? By little, little popcorn bits thrown in the trail for that character to follow, to be like, oh, that's like maybe the first one's like, oh, there's something with language, I need to look at it. And then the next one's like, oh, if I take this word in the language that I use to talk, there's like this code in it. Like, let's say the word good breaks down to go do, right? And then you can say go do good, like a moral instruction. And then it's like, well, that's kind of different, right? Not necessarily blows the roof off of the code, whatever. But it's like, then another breadcrumb trail that character sees to say, oh, if I take these words, and then so forth and so on, until that computer game character, video game character, whatever, walks back and then is basically on the other side of the triangle, seeing it from this side of the code, and also this side for just communicating with other characters in the game. Okay, so that, and if somebody might think, well, why is the code there then? I mean, what purpose does it serve, right? It's like, well, it's right now showing you that there is a code, and that makes you have to think, well, if it's there, could it be just evolution, or would it have to be something conscious that's making sure this works and guiding guiding reality and pre-planning it, pre-scripting it, because these last names came from last names over generations, misspellings, spellings have changed, whatever it may be, right? So it has to be a being that just didn't decide to do it right before the Beatles got together, right? It'd have to make sure these four people through time and their families, their ancestors, stayed within a certain area, so when these four band members were near each other, events would happen that would lead them to each other, right? And connect into the band. It's not like one day they were just the Beatles and they just were like, oh, we're the Beatles. They came together from, they don't even know where. It's like they had a whole life before that, movements through time and space. The one could have, let's say, decided to go, shopping one day or whatever, and maybe never came across one of the other band members, and the Beatles would have never formed, right? Nuancy movements through time, letters that spell, names that were formed and chosen, I guess you can say chosen, and so forth and so on, to make those band members come together at the right time and the right place, exactly as it should have been for those lyrics to be produced, right? Okay, so, or else you would never see these band members' names, I guess, and know that a message was in there or not. But it's something to think about, something to ponder, instead of just thinking, I don't get it, or, well, I believe in faith, and that's it, I don't need nothing else, or, there's nothing there, could never be anything there. Whatever your mind is spewing out, blocking you from actually just leaving yourself open to understand things more. I'm not saying you haven't studied things or looked into things deeply, or have not pieced things together in a certain way that's correct. I'm just merely saying, no matter what you believe, right? You don't know, unless you've seen me do this code breaking already, you did not know this, because I'm the one that made it, I'm the one telling you, right? So you did not know this, so it's something to throw in your bag and think about. And, you can bear it out. Well, how many codes can you break? How many names can you do? How deep does this go? I get all that, right? So that's why I'm doing this podcast, so I can get it out there to show you. So this book is Reality Storyline Decoded too. This is on Amazon.com right now. It's for sale. And this is dedicated to query stacks. What I showed you is a fate stack. Query stacks a little different. I talk about them in episode, I think, 3 to 8. And you can kind of get a gist of what those are. But they're all kind of, matrixed the same way and code broken the same way. But the answers that come out are different. And those type of answers that come out with this are more theologically based, prophetic, also moralistic type lessons and things. And so it's a thick book, Reality Storyline Decoded 2 Query Stacks. I give some examples on the back cover of answers. This equation here actually is the equation of all the answers that are in the book, 20 of them. They all follow the same strict structure. And there are all these query stacks you can learn from the first chapter to the end. They're listed in the order that they appear or should appear in a series based on the names used in them. Why I went from one to the next, okay? And this book is 484 pages. It's thick. It's not just me blabbing about stuff. It's, big enough words with charts and diagrams and different things like that evidence what I'm saying. I don't go through a history of philosophy and do all that. You can find many books that will tell you about all the great philosophers, I'm sure. Wasn't my purpose for writing it. I just wanted to tell you about query stacks and everything about them. So it's like a college book. This is a deck of cards next to it. So it's 8.5 by 11. So you're getting your money's worth. It's $50 on Amazon. It took me a long time to write. I edited, wrote it, did all the graphics, did the whole study. It's all mine in that aspect. But I want you to have it so you can have your own. So okay, again, also I have written a song called Traffic Light Love by David Mivshek. That's me. You can find it on all your streaming services like Spotify or Apple or Amazon Music, whatever. And I do the guitar, singing, and bass guitar in it, and I hired a drummer for it. It's a good rock and roll song. It's gotten some good response, which makes me feel good. So download that. That helps me out. Buy the book. That helps me out. I'll be doing a book for fate stacks, separate one, where I do fate stacks instead of query stacks, but it takes a lot of time, and I have a full-time job, and I'm doing this podcast, and I got other things like the music. So I'm trying to squeeze myself out of doing my job during the day, which is just like doing deliveries and things like that, so I can dedicate more time and get more of this information out for like fate stacks and query stacks and different things like that, because this is more important than me going out there delivering, I think. But I have to have the time to dedicate to writing books too. So I appreciate your time. I'll see you next episode.